All right, and we are live. All
Howdy.
right, so I know it's beating a dead horse talking about passport bros again, but
It's really all I
I've
know.
never, yeah, I've
Right.
never, well, yeah, Gringo guides, you know all about it,
Mhm.
Jared. But I really wanted to dive deeper into it because I'm like super against it, and I know that you've been crazy successful with it down in Mexico
Mhm.
City, and you have been for what, like over a decade?
Yeah, I studied down here abroad from 2006 to 2008, and then I worked here from like 2010, 2012. So I've been off
Mhm.
and on in Mexico for 20 years, and then I lived in San Diego, California for 10 years. So I went to Baja all the damn time. So I'm fairly fluent in the culture, so to speak.
Yeah, makes sense. So before going to any questions and dive deeper into the topic, can you define for me what a passport bro is? Because I know there's like passport bros, expat, like there's multiple different ways you can phrase it, and you're more well versed than I am. So could you explain that?
That's a good question because I hear a lot of different definitions. Guys, as you start filing into the live stream, feel free to opine there in the chat. But in my head, I'd consider myself more of an expat. So I have legal status. I have my own place. I have a life set up here, bank accounts, paperwork, contracts, all that kind of stuff. And again, the legal one is a big thing. So a lot of guys, they come down on a tourist visa. They do their 6 month border runs until Mexican migration looks at their passport and realizes, oh, you're probably living here illegally. And then they give them 10 days instead of 180 days. And then that forces them to go through the residency process. So I'd say I'm more of an expat. And again, alluding back to my previous comment to where I had already lived here before. I went to college down here for a few years. I played baseball down here. I built networks and communities, and I tried to have a business down here for a couple of years. That actually went really well for me. It was me and a Canadian buddy at the time, but things got a little hairy security wise from 2008 to 2011. If anyone can remember back to then, I don't talk too much on those topics because there is a security risk when you actually live here in Mexico. They don't like you talking about those types of things, so I don't do it. So I would consider myself an expat to where I have the full intention of creating a life down here. My life is based down here. Mexico City is my home. It is my home base. To where before I came to Mexico City, I was actually working in El Salvador and I did some backpacking a bit. So I literally just had a duffel bag slung over my shoulder, a little mobile workstation, some workout bands. This is still in COVID, so a lot of stuff was still closed. And then just bare minimum essentials for clothing, a little pocket type fan to blow in my face in some of these hot countries, but I didn't really establish roots anywhere. I was coming and going, crashing in Airbnbs, your shorter term corporate type apartments. And then after the El Salvador gig, I decided, okay, well, I'll try out Mexico City. So I came here, spent a week here, went back to the US, spent 2 weeks here, went back to the US, spent a month here, 3 months. And then after I spent 6 months here I was still on my tourist visa, I decided, you know what, I'm actually going to immigrate here and I'm going to make a life here. So I would consider myself an expat as compared to a digital nomad, which is someone who, just works off a laptop. They can go wherever. In fact, I'm starting to get the bug to where, well, maybe I want to sell all my shit again and be a digital nomad for a while because I still want to see Asia and South America and seen most of Europe, not Eastern Europe, just barely touching the surface in the Middle East. So there's still a lot of world to see. And then passport, bro, this is the one that has the most debate and where people get the most heated. So I had Michael Sartain on my show recently, and he defined passport, bro, more so, and I know this is controversial, more so as a cope. Guys that can't get laid in the U.S., they use the geo arbitrage. I do geo arbitrage too. Earn in dollars, pay in pesos. That's how you get ahead. So um, Sartain position that it's more of a cope for guys that can't have success in the dating market in the US. They think by virtue of being a foreigner that they're going to come down and live a high status or be all of a sudden a high status guy. Maybe your SMB will raise a point or two. I've noticed for mine, it certainly has. But again, I know the language, I know the culture, I know the little jokes, and I had no issues in dating in the US. So that's what Sartain mentions what a passport bro is. I hear guys say that it's guys that come down that just buy a bunch of paid intimacy. That's a passport bro. I know guys, I'm meeting a couple guys for dinner here in a bit. They're not passport bros. They're both in long-term relationships, but they come down for a week every couple months when they can get out of the office and work remotely and just kind of tour around Mexico. I wouldn't consider those guys a passport bro. I think they're more tourists. But passport bros, I think really, and I'd probably define too that when you're going to another country with the sole intent on just getting laid a ton or finding a wife or a girlfriend or whatever. But I think the core, in my version, the core delineation or the core delineator is that do you know the language? Are you legal? Are you actually building a life there? Or are you just going down trying to get some easy play and then go back to the US is probably where I'd make that distinction.
Okay. Yeah. When I think passport bro, I always think of it as sex related. Like
It,
you're
I
yeah.
think I don't know if that's the denotation, but I think that's how people understand it. I think that's the connotation of the word. And in that regard, I could be considered a passport bro. I do very well down here, but I was down here almost 20 years ago, long before passport bros was even a thing. I was down here before Google, I think.
Oh wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so did you like I'm curious. So is it just because you so happen to study down in Mexico that that's the one that you wanted to go to? Or like
Yep.
how did you decide?
No, it's so I was living in San Diego, lost my job during the global pandemic, got locked down. I was making really good money, lived a really good lifestyle there, and I worked really hard to get to that point. But when you live a high rent, high cost lifestyle, and all of a sudden you have no income, especially in a place like California, everything's really expensive. You realize that you don't have a lot of runway. So I very quickly, thank God, my lease was about up. I think it was up within a couple months of me losing that position. Did manage to make some money. I ran some paid Google ads on Facebook Marketplace to where there's a point to where they shut down the beaches for everyone, and then progressively they opened things back up. So there was a small sliver of time in the summer of 2020 to where the beach was only open to local residents. They blocked all the parking. They blocked cars coming in and out. Or they'd ask you a bunch of questions if you left your neighborhood. It really felt like a military state. It was a police state. It was kind of crazy. So on Google, or on Facebook Marketplace, I ran some targeted ads to the top 10% wealthiest zip codes across the U.S. Like, hey, I have a beachfront apartment on Pier 21, charged an exorbitant amount for the room, and that paid my lease until it was over. And then I was going through, I was already downsizing. I was already thinking about going abroad. So even before the pandemic happened, I was doing exploratory trips. I was getting further into Latin America. I knew that I wanted to go back to Latin America at some point. Living in San Diego, I went down to Tijuana all the time, went to Baja California all the time because it's, just a few minutes away. And I really missed my Mexico lifestyle I had before. So it was already an idea I had on the top of my head. COVID just kind of forced my hand into making that transition quicker than I probably would have planned. And then I got a job in El Salvador, building out a remote sales team and business operation unit. And then that company eventually sold once we got it off the ground. So it's kind of like, all right, well, where do I go now? I don't want to go back to my hometown. And then the question you asked was, did I choose Mexico because I lived here before? That's precisely why I chose it, because I'd already done this before. I already know how to get an apartment in Mexico. I know how to buy all the appliances. I know how to get stuff set up. I know all the banking systems. So I figured, okay, well, if I want to do the abroad lifestyle, I'll just go to a country I already know. There's other countries on my list, but again, things were locked down still at that time. So yeah, Italy would be cool. I went there this summer, but I don't know Italian. It's close enough to Spanish to where you can kind of start to understand it, but I don't want to learn a whole new language. I don't want to learn a whole new culture, but I've been so close to Mexico for the last 2 decades. It just kind of seemed like a logical transition for me.
Yeah, and that's what I find so interesting about it. Like, yeah, you can pick everything up and go move somewhere, but like you got to learn the language. Like that's one thing that there's a lot of little things
people
here.
don't get that. They think they're going to come down and have the results I do. Since I've done the rebrand on my Gringo Guides channel, it's not growing like it was before, but I get people that, hey, I'm in Mexico City, let's hang out. And they think they're just going to have chicks throw themselves at these guys. And that's not the case. I mean, you have to know the language, you have to know the culture, the little things like the girl always walks on the inside of the street. I see red pill type topics to where, oh, you should never hold the door open for a chick. Okay, try that in a Latin country. She's going to think you're a fucking weirdo. Like
Yeah.
those are little cultural things. Or when a female introduces herself to you, I'm sitting down right now. If a girl walked in now, just habitually, you stand up, you give her a kiss on the cheek. You'll see guys like do like the weird hug or the handshake thing because that's US culture. But if you don't know those little cultural subtleties, yeah, you might get some attention. I have plenty of friends that, they can get laid. They're usually not the highest quality chicks. But a lot of times the girls get frustrated, and especially with the language component. A good buddy of mine who's a bit close to both of us, I always get on his ass for that. It's like you have to learn the language if you really want to have success in dating here, because it's one of those things where I'll be out with a gringo friend and the bartender comes up and asks something, and then the music's loud and you can barely hear anything, and the bartender's kind of rushed and he's getting frustrated and my buddy's getting frustrated, and then they're both kind of talking to each other in louder, more accelerated voices, but they don't understand each other. Then they look at me and I have to come in and solve things. So for me as a guy, that's annoying sometimes. It kind of throws me out of my vibe and then brings me back into like, oh, okay, it's like having a kid who can't talk. So imagine that from a girl. So like, okay, you're dating a girl and she could be legit into you, but you're handicapping yourself. The bill comes or there's something wrong, or heaven forbid the police come and talk to you, and as the guy you don't know the language, so you're just standing there and you're putting that all on your girl, from intersexual dynamics. That's just going to break the attraction almost immediately. And a lot of guys come down under the false pretenses that, oh, I'm foreign, I'm going to get laid, and to be honest, most of them don't.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, because I think the language thing is so important. Like, I know before I met you and learned more about people going down to Mexico, it was a big thing of people talking about going out to Japan. And I always just imagined it like, why would I want to do that? Go somewhere where I don't know the culture, I don't know the language, but like even going out to like Thailand and different places like that, I don't understand what that big push has been about. I don't know if it's still as big of a push, but I never could wrap my head around that. Where, because I've dated some foreign girls, and for example, before I met my girlfriend, I was dating a Brazilian girl, and with her accent and her limited knowledge of the English language,
like you have a kid, right?
Yeah, yes,
they're fucking babbling and spitting all over themselves.
Yeah, and at the time I was trying to decide, do I want to get more serious with her, or I guess I was dating her and my girlfriend casually at the time, and I decided to get more serious with who is my girlfriend now, because I couldn't get over that. Like I didn't want to, even if they were intelligent, I don't want to be in a relationship with somebody who I can't communicate with on the same level. You know what I mean?
Yep. I had I'm seeing a couple girls, but I had one over the other night, and she's really into me. So we had to the point to where like, okay, she's proven that she's into me. This is a thing too. So a lot of guys that come abroad, they think, okay, there will be girls into you, but there's a reason that girl's into you, especially if you can't communicate with her. Thailand's a good example. You get these overweight kind of dumpy guys, and this is what Sartain mentioned. Okay, guys that can't get laid in the US, guys that are fat, they go to Southeastern Asia, and then all of a sudden, oh, I have all these girls. You're like, yeah, these girls don't really like you. They see you as a mark. And normally these guys are paying for it. Or if they're not on the front end, the girl's going to play them, and then they're going to pay for it on the other end, especially if you're not game aware in the US, because in other cultures, they don't have the whole FNS movement. They don't have the genders are equal or any of that stuff. Like, you need to be the fucking man. And if you don't know how to do that in your home country, which a lot of guys in the US don't, then that's going to turn off the local girls, but they'll see you just as a walking ATM or a walking wallet. So a lot of guys get into trouble, again, coming down on those false pretenses that, oh, I'm foreigner, I'm just going to have an easy time. And there's certain girls that will look for those guys because they're marks. You hear about it all the time in Colombia. I think I'm going to do a video here on my channel soon about the scopolamine epidemic. In my Latin America game circles, a lot of guys are staying away from Colombia. I mean, we had a conversation.
What is that again? Scopolamine?
It's essentially like a date grape type drug, but
is that the truth serum drug?
No, that's the one that just I mean, I've never been drugged before, so unless I did it myself, microdosing mushrooms or stuff like that. But no, that's the one. So basically the story is like a guy, unsuspecting gringo, goes to somewhere like Medellin, is a big one where it's happening a lot. Goes out, meets a girl. She seems really into him. And back in the day, what would happen in Colombia, you'd meet a girl, you go out to a normal bar, not a bar where prostitutes hang out or any of that. You'd meet a girl, you'd chat her up. And this is me speaking Spanish, by the way. You're having a good time, you dance, and you think it's just a normal hookup type situation, that you're gaming like you would a normal girl. And then you're like, okay, you go for the pull. And back in the day, they'd be like, oh, $100, or, oh, well, how much do you have? You're like, well, what are you talking about? We've been vibing the entire night. And and you think it's a legitimate interaction. You're like, all right, yeah, I got this girl. So now what they're doing on that end, and it's happening in more countries too, to where they're fast tracking that, to where the girl's not going to put in 2 or 3 hours with you. She'll come up, be a bit coquettish with you, maybe invite you to a drink, or you don't watch your drink. So like when I'm out anywhere, even in the US, just always have your drink in your hand. You don't ever set it down. I take my drink to the bathroom with me, so I've never had any of those issues. That's just general awareness 101. So I mean, if this is happening to you guys, then you probably need some more travel experience first before you for intimacy in those regards, because again, you're just a mark. So What the story is like guy goes out to a bar or whatever, orders a couple of drinks for a girl, and then all of a sudden wakes up the next morning back in his hotel room. Wallet's gone, computer's gone, passport's gone. Eventually gets to an internet cafe, realizes that these guys are quite sophisticated. So usually the girls, they're working for like a group of guys or like a local gang. These guys are sophisticated. They've drained their crypto wallets. They've drained their bank accounts. They've essentially just bankrupted the guy. So that's happening a lot in places like Colombia, countries that are kind of have political issues going on. I've heard of a couple express kidnappings in Mexico City, but those are people that come down here thinking, they've watched a little too much Narcos and they think that they're going to be a foreigner and get into that shit. That's a bad idea. Don't do that. So those are the types of guys that get into trouble, but I haven't heard of any like the scopolamine type things here, but kind of leading back to my original point. So there's different experiences you can have. So I had a girl over the other day. She works for legal counsel for a major international corporation, makes really good money for a Mexican. I don't ever do the 50-50 thing, but she'll show up with food, or she bought me concert tickets for this weekend, or her uncle has a house on the beach and invited me to go there in a couple of weeks. So these are girls that like, they actually bring something to the relationship. It's not just me forking over money. So usually I vet my girls. Once they get to that point, I'm like, oh, she's in it for me. She actually really likes me. Then I'll start kind of opening up a bit. So we had a 4-hour long conversation the other night talking about, childhoods and growing up. And she got really deep into stuff, her insecurities and kind of like some body issues. And I used to be fat too. So I kind of broke down that veil and let her have a glimpse into that frame of my life, or that aspect of my life too. And just had a really good conversation, and then felt at the end that we're actually building closeness. We're actually building a shared connectedness. And then to contrast that, then I go out and there's other gringos and like, oh, blue, favorite color, azul. It's azul. Yeah. You like azul? Like, okay, cool. That's fun. It's a fun little banter. Like maybe you'll get a lay out of it, but you're not going to build a relationship with someone.
No. And it's just so crazy to me, because I was actually having a discussion with somebody about this the other day. I don't understand that. Like, to me, communication is a core fundamental piece of a relationship. Like, if you're just trying to get laid, okay, that's one thing, but like, marriages and relationships don't last if you guys can't communicate with one another. It makes no sense to me. And honestly, I mean, going back to the very beginning of this whole thing, why do guys even want to leave the US? Like, is it really that bad here? My personal opinion, it's not. You're in Mexico City. I'm in the States. I've been across the country to a bunch of different cities, and it really isn't that difficult. And quite frankly, my opinion on it is that everybody is seeing like they're getting their opinion out of watching YouTube videos and seeing that stupid stuff, stuff that goes on in Miami or Vegas. Like, they're not. Because the typical girl is not going to go on a podcast. The typical girl is not going to be throwing out TikToks all the time. Like, the normal girl is just keeping to herself and living her life. So we're only seeing one subsect of the population. And quite frankly, wrapping the whole thing together, if you can't game here in the US, then you don't have game. Like, I don't care if you say you can, I go to Thailand or whatever, and I do just fine. Like, you should move out here too. It's like, it's fantastic. Well, why can't you do well in the States? And I'll give you an example. This isn't to throw shade on him, because I appreciate everything he's done for me, but modern life dating. He lives out in Tokyo, and when he comes to the US, I've talked to multiple people that hang out with him. They'll try and game with him. The dude has zero fucking game. Zero game. And for somebody who talks as like a game expert, well, maybe you're a game expert in Tokyo, but when you're in the States, all you do is complain about, oh, the girls are fat, they're gross, they're not feminine, but you can't pull. So you just don't have game. So what are you talking about? And that's just really my opinion on a lot of people who push for the passport bro, or try and push people to go to other countries. Like, the Eastern woman, it's got to be better. I don't know. It doesn't. They're not selling me on it.
I think it's better at first because you have that whole novelty factor. So if you look at when people go through culture shock, there's different phases, just like the stages of going through grief, because essentially you're breaking up with your former identity and creating a new one. So it is like going through the stages of grieving a death in the family, or a friend, or a close one, or a loved one. And So I think that initially, yeah, there's that novelty, like, oh, whoa, it's so different. Oh, the girls are hot. Like maybe local compared to local standards, she might not even be that hot. She could just be a 6 locally, but she looks different than what you're used to. They usually are a little more feminine. They are a little more fit. They are a little more pleasant to be around. But I'm in the same camp as you. I did well in the US. I didn't leave the US because of lack of game. I left the US because I'd lived a high rent lifestyle in California and I lost my job and they closed down our economy. So I was like, all right, I have some savings, I have some investments, I have some side sources of income. I need to pull this money out of the US market and then geo arbitrage to make sure, because at that time I didn't know how long California was going to be locked down. And I knew what my monthly expenses were. And I saw that bank accounts balance going down fast. So I decided, okay, I'll just go to Mexico because I lived there before. I lived here for 4 years before. I had a great time. Again, already have networks, already have connections, already know people, already had lived a life down here before. So it wasn't that hard of a transition for me. To where I didn't have that novelty factor, like, oh my God, I live in Mexico. It's like, oh, I'm just back in Mexico. You know, it's the same as if I went back to my hometown or went to another US state. So I'm kind of more in your camp. I never really understood that either. And then this idea, I think it's important to address that. So you mentioned the MLD case. This happens to me sometimes too. And I noticed I did this in college because I spent a few years in college down here in Mexico. So I did really, really well down here, but I couldn't do as well in the US. And I actually just had a girl over earlier. They always ask me about fitness advice and like how to learn another language because I speak Spanish very well and I learned it very quickly. And when I speak to a local, they're like, oh my God, like how do you speak at that level? So I break down my methodology. And I watched a video the other day that essentially said that when you learn a new language, you're creating a second brain in your head. So when I was conversing with this girl, she's like, well, you speak it really well. She's like, you're not thinking in English right now, are you? She's like, and I said, no, I'm 100% Spanish now. She's like, well, when you came and got me downstairs, you were still thinking in English because you're a little rocky. It was kind of like you're like an old car, like just you got to kick it over, and then once it starts running, once you get it in gear, just then it's going. So it's one of those things. Like you do have two different brains, and you create two separate identities for yourself. So when I was in college, I was the man. I played baseball. I was about the same shape I am now at like 19 years old. I had a house off campus, a huge house in a private community with a bunch of foreigners that lived there. The other abroad students, you had to live with a host family. I had a horrible host family experience. And I told the school, I was like, hey, I'm down here on scholarship. I'm going to go somewhere else. If you don't waive that host family provision, I want my own house. And then they made it happen in the school. It's hard. It's hard to rent places down here when you're a foreigner. They talk about discrimination in the U.S. Okay, go outside of the U.S. You will be discriminated against. Like, oh, you're an American. Yeah, we're not going to rent to you. Okay, cool. So those types of things. But what in my previous experience, I had the identity that like I was the man walking around campus. I walked with my head high, my shoulders back. Everyone knew who I was. I played sports for the university. I was well known and well liked across the campus. We had awesome house parties. We went to the best nightclubs and got invited and comped and all that stuff. So that was my identity in that particular point of time, in that geographical region. And, you know, I haven't been back to Guadalajara in years. If I went back there now, no one would probably even know who I am. That was almost 20 years ago. But at that point in my life, I'd go back to the US and then go just to a regular state school where I wasn't in a frat. I didn't play any sports. My brothers did all that stuff. So I go to their campuses, be like, oh yeah, you're so-and-so's brother. That was my identity. Oh, you're so-and-so's brother. He's pretty cool. So by proxy, if my brothers get chicks, then I'll meet other girls in the friend group and maybe something will happen. Whereas in Guadalajara, I was like, I'm the guy. So I think that's what probably happened in MLD's head. In Tokyo, like he's moved his entire life over there to where like I have my game down pat here. It is predictable. I know where they're at in the sequence. I know exactly what to do at any point in the interaction. Whereas I go to the US, I don't go to the US that often anymore. So things change very quickly and I need to play catch up. If I go to other countries, same thing. I spent some time in Europe and the Middle East this summer. It took me 2 or 3 days just to learn some of the little nuances. Guess what? In Israel, girls don't come straight to your house. They will meet you out for drinks after 2 or 3 drinks. You can usually do a poll. It has to be one of those kind of, oh, yeah, let's go get some ice cream. And then, oh, I got to run upstairs real quick to change a shirt. It's fucking hot here. Okay, yeah, I'll show you the apartment. You have to do kind of one of those things where in Mexico, they'll just come straight to the house. But for guys that aren't game aware, they don't know how to run those sequences. They have to do 3, 4, 5 dates, maybe still date for months. And again, they don't know the culture. So I think it's one of those things to where like I've been removed from the US for so long that I do much better in Mexico, but I still get laid when I go to the US. It's just a question of, do I want to? If I go to the US, usually I'm hanging out with my family. I want to see my nieces and nephews. I want to go visit my grandparents who are super old. So that's not on the top of my mind. It usually happens. for these types of meetups. I think for half the meetups I did in the previous group I managed, I got laid on half of them, but I wasn't going there to get laid. I was going to meet guys in the group and to meet the creator with whom I was collaborating, and kind of more on the business admin or operations side of things. And I didn't really have time to game or get laid. So not to try to make excuses for guys that could fall in that camp, but I've noticed that there's certain areas where I do a lot better than others. But if you give me 2 or 3 weeks in a new location, I can usually figure it out. 2 or 3 months, I have a rotation, and then 2 or 3 years, it's just down pat.
Yeah. Yeah, no, 100% with you. Because every area is different. Even if you just go to different cities, it can be very different. But yeah, give it a couple of weeks and you should be good to go. And I think that's one of the frustrations I have when they talk about passport bros and things like that. Like, as Contrarian was saying here, it's not about not doing well in the States, but it's about meeting more traditional, polite, and feminine women abroad. And I would 100% agree with that. It's much harder to find those types of women in the United States, but it doesn't mean that they can't be found. It's just, generally speaking, other countries are a lot better with it. And so that's why I feel like guys that if you don't have your game down, then that should not be a factor of you moving somewhere else. And I unfortunately I don't know if it's truly the case. I don't know a ton of people who have moved to other countries, but most of them that I do know, they moved for women. Like there's that whole group of people that do pickup in like Poland, and what do they have, like London day game or something?
Yeah, the London day game model, I think, is what they use. Joel's coming on here soon. I know he can speak to that. He's spoken on that topic publicly before.
Yeah, so I don't know exactly what the numbers are, but I hear it a lot that it's a lot about the women, and so I stick by the fact that if that's even a consideration, finding a girl or finding more girls, then I think your head's in the wrong place for it. But I mean, that's just my opinion.
And if I'm being honest, there was an element of me. I did a 10-point checklist of things important to me. Women was one of those things, but I think, again, I did really well in Southern California. So I had found all these types of spaces, did the look maxing, got into the fitness thing, started upping my lifestyle. I started doing this like almost a decade ago. So I was already seeing a really good results in California. And California is a pretty tough market. I mean, there's a lot of good looking guys that drive Porsches and live in penthouses on the beach. You're not in fact, all of your neighbors are exactly like you. And so I still did fairly well, because I think game, like, as a skill set or as an internal operating process, you do have to get that down and internalize it and then come up with your own blueprint. And I learned all the lessons too in California. I used to do the multiple dates and do the expensive dinners and realized you didn't have to do that. Then I did the coffee dates and realized, guess what? You get them straight to the house. But I didn't escalate fast enough straight to the house. And I had 3 girls back to back that left at the hour mark. And I asked my roommate, who was, really good at game at that time. It's like, hey, what's going on? He's like, hey, these girls came over to hook up and you're not moving things forward. You're just fucking talking their ears off. So I learned all these things in the US, and then you come abroad. So yeah, I did really well in California, but when I went to El Salvador, I did a lot better, just by virtue of there wasn't a lot of foreigners there. And we'll get into this topic here in a second. I was like the only guy who looks like this and has the type of lifestyle that a lot of guys aspire to attain. So in El Salvador, I had no competition. They were literally just coming in and out of the house. I was not trying to game. I was actually down there trying to build a business with a buddy of mine from Florida. And we got distracted. I mean, we were just having a good time. We were invited. It's a very small country. So once you're in that intimate social circle, and there's a neighborhood there where we stayed, to where it's like a 2-kilometer radius. Outside of that, the country was still pretty dangerous at the time. It's like about the time Bukele was taking his first presidential seat. And so we stayed within the circle, and within that little social group, girls would come in from other parts of town and they just wanted to be a part of that. So looking back retroactively, yeah, there's a lot of like social game elements and the looks maxing thing. And like the whole, I'd say my status increased a couple points by virtue of there were no other foreigners there at that time. And then I came to Mexico City and realized, okay, well, I did well in Guadalajara. I think in my last semester there, I had a notch count of 18 girls for that semester. That was me playing baseball and living on campus, or living off campus, but spent all my time on campus, walking around like the cock of the walk, being in the gym 3-4 hours a day, having social circles, going out every weekend, traveling all the time, to where when I came back to Mexico City, like now I can actually, I don't like to share numbers, but I can knock that off in a month, with relative ease, because years of doing this, you get the whole system down. So like there was a degree that when I went to El Salvador, I'm like, oh my God, I have to do nothing. And these girls are throwing themselves at me, which is what a lot of the guys' fantasy for going abroad is. I think that did distract me a bit to where maybe I didn't put as much time and effort into the company. I know I didn't, because my buddy and I both fell into this. We were just going to the beach and surfing all the time and smoking weed and playing guitar. And then like, oh, we worked every day, but it wasn't like when I was doing the corporate grind in the US to where you go to the office, you spend all day at the office, and then you go home, you go to sleep, you do it again. It wasn't that. It's like, oh yeah, we'll clack off a couple of emails. Oh yeah, we have a call with the vendor. Oh yeah, we have to onboard this person. But in the meantime, like we're smoking and chilling and surfing and have girls around us, beers coming to the table. So probably not as productive as we could have been. I think that could be a distraction. But again, for me, the focus was not to go to El Salvador to game chicks. I was already doing that in California. The goal was not to come to Mexico to game girls. That's already a part of who I am. So no matter where I go on the planet, that is who I am. By extension of me, that's going to happen eventually.
That makes sense. Okay. Well, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Let's switch gears a little bit then. For somebody who may want to move to a different country, I know you've kind of went through your experience a little bit where you would come down for a week and then 2 weeks. And I'm sure there's so much you could get into. But if, as somebody who is interested in moving to another country or even coming down to Mexico City, like what are the things that maybe they're not thinking about that they should be prepared for with a move like that? Whether it be some of the legal stuff. I know you've done things before talking about like difficulties with bringing a car, how you should sell your car and then buy it again. So what are some of the biggest things that popped up for you, like the most important things that you maybe didn't think about?
First, identify where you want to go. So in my head, when I was a kid, I studied abroad down here at first. I grew up on a farm in Eastern Washington State, so I knew I needed to speak Spanish at some point because my original life plan was to like marry the high school girlfriend and then go and take over the family farm. And then we had a lot of migrant workers. We still do, to where every time I go home, I have to go out there and do some kind of like change management or some sort of like consulting or whatever. Translate for my grandparents in terms of like, here's what we're doing, here's some, all of that stuff. So I knew I had to learn Spanish at some point. In my head, I was like, okay, well, like San Diego, they speak Spanish. Miami. I never considered living in Mexico. I think there's a girl in one of my classes, and she mentioned she was going to Mexico, and she talked me into it. She's like, hey, I was a couple of years ahead in school, so I could have graduated 2 years earlier from university. Didn't want to do that. I was on full scholarship. So I was like, all right, like I'm going to max this out. So I looked into, she mentioned, hey, you know what, if you pay Mexican tuition, then whatever's left over in your scholarship, they'll just give that to you in cash. So for me, that was like, okay, look at what your opportunities are. And then I started looking between, okay, my options were Monterrey, Puebla, or Guadalajara. A lot of people in my a lot of my academic peers, oh, we're going to go to Spain. Okay, that's like 13,000 euros. Waste all your money in one semester in Spain. Whereas I was paying, I think at the time it was $600 per semester for tuition plus housing. It was like $400 or $500 a month because I lived in a nice part of town. Wow. But compared to what my home university in the US was, it was a fraction of the cost. I'm like, okay, I can get 2 or 3 years of runway in Guadalajara as compared to a couple of weeks in Spain. So I'm going to do that. The goal was to learn Spanish initially to go and take over the family business. My life has since taken a much different trajectory, but start thinking on the top of your head, like, where would you like to go? Have you always been into French culture? Have you always really liked Italians? Have you always, for whatever reason, maybe you've never been to Argentina, but it just, there's like an itching or a yearning in your soul that's where your heart belongs. Start identifying those places, I think, is the first step. Obviously, start getting some basic language skills down. Yeah, Google Translate works fine for very surface level conversations, but Joel and I talk all the time when the Google Translate screws up. I was like, all right, what'd you try to tell the girl? Okay. And then what did Google Translate say? And then me, since I have my Spanish brain developed, I look at it, I'm like, oh Lord, oh no. So do not rely on your translators. Start to learn the language, start to kind of get involved. Especially if you're in the US or Canada or any English speaking Western world country, or hell, any Western country, English speaking or not for that matter, there's immigrant communities from all over the world. So start hanging out in those communities. Do you like these people? Like, hey, I'm gonna go live in Ethiopia. Okay, go to your local Ethiopian restaurant. Are they assholes to you? Do you like it? Do you like how the food smells? Do you like how it tastes? Do you like how they dress? That's just an example. I don't ever single out any country, but if you're thinking at the top of your head, because guys do this all the time, They sell all their shit. They pack up the car. And then I had a coaching client do this a couple of years ago. He was going through a divorce in the US, got his license taken away for like 2 or 3 DUIs or something stupid like that, had some sort of like an ongoing criminal case. It's like, well, Jaren, I'm just going to pack my car and move to Mexico. I was like, do not do that. If you have legal issues in the US, resolve all of that, because you're going to complicate your life so much. And then didn't listen to me, booked a call with me. And then a week later, I get a call from a Mexican number, from a Mexican area code I didn't recognize. He was in Juarez, Mexico. He got arrested by Mexican immigration because he crossed into Mexico with a pending criminal trial in the US. Don't do that. Now, I know the US likes bringing in criminals, but other countries do not want the trash of your home country. So if you have legal issues, so little things like that, like, is everything tied up at home? Are you paying alimony? Are you going through an active divorce? Or is your company being investigated? Are you under sanctions by the SEC? Any of that stuff, whatever it is, make sure that everything is squared away at home. For me at home, like, all of my stuff goes to my home address. My mom's retired. She's my accountant. My brother's a lawyer. He does all my legal stuff, and it's pretty easy. And then they just send me messages and emails like, hey, this came in the mail. What do you want me to do with it? Oh, put it in this file. Oh, send it here. Sometimes I have to get stuff notarized. So there's a stack of papers. Whenever I go home, I just take it to the notary, sign it. They put it in the log, and that's good. So like, you have to start thinking that it's kind of like the whole immigrant story of how the US was founded. We're leaving England and we're not coming back. Like, we're going to go on this 3-month journey and we're going to wave goodbye to our family. We're not going to see them again. In the digital world, obviously, that's a lot easier. Like, I'm a direct flight away from California or, any major metro in the US. I grew up in a small town, so I have to take a commuter flight to get there, or 2 flights, but start squaring things away at home. And then as you're doing that simultaneously, that's when you start doing your exploratory trips. Hey, I've always been interested in Argentina. Okay, before you move to Argentina, like, Argentina is as far away from Mexico as Europe is from Mexico. It's actually further. I think it's like a 12, 13-hour flight from here, from Cancun to Brussels. I think I did it in 7.5, 8 hours. So Argentina, although they speak Spanish, they don't speak the same Spanish as Mexico. It's a very diverse language. In fact, when I hear Chilean or Argentinian accents, sometimes my ears like, what? Is that Italian? Like, I can understand Italian better than Chilean Spanish. So you have to go put yourself out there, go through these experiences, tie everything up at home. That's the first thing. And then that's where I say, okay, take a trip down there. And then the first time around, stay for a week. You're going to do all the touristy stuff, take the open bus tour and go out to the clubs and hit all the touristy spots and load all the stories to Instagram. You're going to have that tourist experience, because if you have a tourist experience and you think the place sucks, then scratch it off your list. Now, when you go back, and that's why I progressively spent more and more time, like, okay, I'm going to stay in not a nice neighborhood for a couple of weeks. I'm going to see what's a middle-class neighborhood look like? What does it feel like living here? Is it dangerous at night? Are the streets well lit? You don't realize until you live somewhere, there's things that might be just non-starters for you. And you don't want to be stuck in a situation to where you can't get out, to where you've burned the ships, or you've burned all your bridges, or you have, like I mentioned earlier, legal stuff back home or financial issues back home, to where, okay, if I go back to the US, I'm gonna get arrested at the first port of entry. And I've heard these stories before. A lot of guys think that I'm just gonna escape in this magical new lifestyle where I'm gonna be king alpha and hot women are gonna throw themselves at me and I'm gonna have the harem of traditional women and have all these kids. Like, no, you gotta build up to that point. And still a lot of work. It's probably as much, if not more work, than in your home country. So come down here, do the exploratory trip, start learning the language, and then kind of ease into it. The more you're tying up loose ends at home, the more you can start building new networks here. And again, going back to our first question, for me, that's like the expat model, to where you're building a life in the new country. Now, if you just want to go down and get laid, okay, well, yeah, keep your apartment in the Bronx or Queens or Brooklyn or whatever. Yeah, you have 2 weeks mandatory PTO, or a lot of these companies like unlimited PTO, and then we force you to take 2 or 3 weeks. Okay, take a week and come down to Mexico City. Hit me up, guys, at Jaren Scott. I'll take you out. We'll have a good time. I'll introduce you to my social circle. But if you're not interested in learning Spanish, if you're not interested in actually living as a Mexican in Mexico with Mexican legal status, then stay at home and just come down every now and then and have a good time. That's what I did. That's what I did. But when I was still in San Diego, any long weekend, I'd go down to Baja. If I had, if it was a weekend to where, okay, we got the Friday off and then Monday was a federal holiday, then I'd take 3 days PTO or whatever that worked out to be, and I'd go to like Colombia for a week. So so start there if you're not in that situation. But eventually, I'd say ease your way into it and make sure you like it. I've known a lot of people that come down here too, to where they spend a couple weeks or a month here, and like, bro, I can't stand it here. Why? Oh, they pay everything in pesos and they speak Spanish. Well, yeah, they don't speak English here.
Yeah, like, no doubt,
Mexico. You didn't know that? Like a lot of them don't speak English in the US. Like, do you really think they speak English here? And again, the ones that do, you're going to pay for it. You're going to pay the gringo tax. In a neighborhood where everyone speaks English, there are other foreigners, and you're going to pay way too much for rent. And the clubs where they cater to Americans, you're going to pay American or European prices. And guess what? The girls that go there, they're going to be the same types of girls that go after guys like you in the US. So you're not really having an abroad experience. I love it when guys tell me like, oh yeah, I'm going to go to Cancun. I was like, well, why? Like, just go to Florida. It's the same thing. It looks exactly the same. Everyone speaks English. You pay the same prices. And in Florida, the cops don't try to shake you down for pissing in public or throwing beer bottles in the street. They don't like it, but here you're going to get yourself in some trouble. So I've never understood that. I'm going to leave my country to have the exact same experience in my home country. No, you have to start to not kill that self, but develop that second brain, develop that second identity, and then start to, the Spanish word popped in my head, alejarse, like remove yourself from that and then start to step into your new life, your new persona, your new identity and your new language. And that takes some time. That's a process, but that's the way I would recommend going about it. If you want to do it for the long haul, if you just want to go get some easy puss, like guess what? You can do that in the US. Go to South Padre Island in Texas, go to Panama City Beach in Florida, go, if you're in Southern California, go to Rosarito for spring break. Okay. Yeah. You're going to get some easy lays. I wouldn't recommend Medellin anymore, because if you don't have a broad experience and you go to those places, you're gonna get drugged and robbed. There's a high likelihood. And I know I'll get blown up in the comments for this. On Sartain's show I did too, but I see it happen more often than not. But myself and I and my inner circle of guys, doesn't happen to us. Gotcha.
Well, that's great advice. Thanks for diving so deep into it. I think there's a delineation that needs to be made between if you want to go for the girls or whatever else, then you just go on the trip. But if you're serious about it, this is like a 2-3 year long process of you preparing and then making that move to the new life.
And that's to anywhere for guys. Oh, I'm going to go to Thailand. Do you speak Thai? Like, I've never been to Thailand, but I know that going to Thailand, looking the way I do and the profile I have, that I'm going to attract a certain type of people. Initially, I attracted that certain type of people here too, until I opened my mouth like, oh, dude, you like, what? You speak Spanish? And not only do I speak Spanish, I think like these people. So I'll say things in English. People are like, oh my God, I can't believe you believe that. Like, down here, it's a classist and a racist society. So sometimes things will slip out from my Spanish brain in English. People are like, oh, dude, what the hell? You can't, we have thought crimes in the US. You can't think that in the English world. But for me, like, sorry, I've been in my Mexican brain all day. And like, that's just how we view reality. Guess what, bro? You're black. You're not fucking African-American. Okay. What country in Africa are you from? But in Spanish, you're just negro. Oh, you're fat. You're gordito. Like, there's no PC down here. So it's like, if you got offended me just saying something like that, or I say things, they taught it in universities down here. The problem with Mexico is that there's a class system, and the Spanish never successfully conquered the natives. In the US, I know it's a terrible history. We put them on reservations. We essentially genocided them. In Mexico, they tried to enslave them, and then they had the revolution. So you take the European mindset away, and then like, okay, yeah, have fun trying to create your own society after we conquered yours. And they didn't do it all the way. So it's still a fractured and stratified society. That is what is taught in schools down here. When I said it in the US, people are like, oh, you're racist. Like, okay, guess what? Don't go outside the US. If they use the term open-minded, if you're not open-minded, guess what? If people look at me differently, I've got a lot of black buddies. Joel's going to come on here in a second. He's Asian. People treat you differently based on your race, based on your class, based on the way you speak the language. Even within Spanish, they are more racist amongst themselves than they are with foreigners. But the way you speak Spanish, if you're thinking you're going to speak like ghetto cholo Spanish from the LA, I was on Rich's podcast a few months ago, and some guys like, oh, how do you say side piece? I'm like, oh, it's amante. And some guys in the chat, or a bunch of guys in the comment, like, no, it's Sancho. Like, no one says that down here. If you use a word like Sancho down here, they're going to know you're LA ghetto trash. And like, I love my cholo brethren, but I'm just saying, like, Mexico is a classist society. And even if you are Hispanic American, but you don't know the class structure here, you're going to have a bad time. And again, if you're offended, if your little fingers are fucking warming up on the keyboard, you're going to leave a heated comment to me. Don't go abroad, because you're not ready for it and you're going to have a bad time. So I assume it's the same thing if I go to like Thailand or Japan. I think a good thing to do, I'd probably hit up someone like MLD. Hey, show me the ropes, ease me into it. How do I go about this, from someone who's done it? And I think Joel's in the back room, but kind of the same thing. He's down here. Like if he came down here on his own and had to rent the apartment and set up the house and set up all the utilities and then hire all the lawyers, and he doesn't speak Spanish, like, oh boy, you're going to get robbed. You're going to get robbed blind, and you're going to get bent over and screwed every which way to Sunday, and then learn your lesson, and then probably not want to come back.
Well, that actually leads me to an interesting
segue.
question. Yeah, that I do have a question for Joel.
Mhm.
So first off, hey brother, how you doing? I think you might still be mute. Yeah, it cut off for a second and you're muted.
Nice. All right. What's up? What's up?
Cool. So speaking of moving to a different country and definitely getting some help beforehand, didn't you recently move to Poland?
Yeah, that's it.
I did.
You were in Poland for a while, and I'm curious. Like, did you have somebody who walked you? Like, did you meet somebody there, or did you have somebody who walked you through how that was going to go? Like, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I was tuning into your guys' convo. Really good stuff. You guys are diving into a lot of different important aspects, I think. And in terms of Poland, anyway, yeah, I had never really traveled that much before. I was kind of always stuck in the same place for so long, and I think that kind of led to my itch to want to travel and go somewhere else. And there was absolutely, where I was living, no novelty factor because I've been there for 29 years. So yeah, I had a good mentor of mine. He's been on the channel before. His name is Nick. He did the podcast on life after game. That's a real good one to dive into for you guys listening. If you're kind of wondering what happens after you've done the whole dating thing, he has like a family now and he's kind of more chilled, settled down. And he's like, yeah, you really should go, man. Like, I think it'd be a good experience for you. You're going to have a better dating experience than where you are now. And I said, yeah, full sense. So I sold all my stuff within like 2 weeks, and it was a very spontaneous thing. And I just left, and he did connect me with a guy that he knew when he went to Poland. He was an older guy. And so he really helped me kind of, not a ton, but, we went out a couple times. And what I found is that, I think a lot of this comes to personality too, and like what your personality type is. And I have that kind of adventure spirit. It's really easy for me to talk to strangers. That's not like an issue for me. So I was able to meet people very quickly. Like the minute I got off the plane, I was just started to do my approaches, talk to people. And the first guy I met, actually, he was a barber. And I saw him in the park, and he was with like this like beautiful like Polish girl, and they're like making out. And I'm like, I know who this guy is. Like, I know what this guy's about. So I approached him, and I'm like, "What's up, dude? Yo, like, what's up? Like, what are you doing?" And he's like, "Yo," and he had that just like smirk on his face, and and we kind of became buddies there. And yeah, it was just kind of really off to the races at that point.
Interesting. And how long were you there?
I was there for like 2.5 months, I think. A little less than 3. Yeah.
And then
what made you come back? Was it I was
gonna ask that.
Yeah, I'm curious, like what made you come back?
Joel has a good cautionary tale. So another thing for guys to avoid when you go abroad. What happened, Joel?
Guys, too many women in Poland. No, I'm just kidding. Unfortunately, I wasn't mature enough with my money at that point, and I had a couple fun weekends, and I blew most of my savings in that short period, and just wasn't earning the income I thought, because I went to Poland with a job already with somebody, with a friend from a different country, and that job didn't pan out. So I ran out of funds and had to come back. And thankfully I met you two at the time. So we were able to kind of get off the ground and running immediately when I got home, which was very helpful. And yeah, guys, traveling abroad, you got to be wise with your money too, because even though it's a different country and the fees can be less, and the cost of living, that can kind of do something psychologically where it's like, okay, well, now I can spend like I'm a millionaire in the US because things are 30 cents lower in wherever country I'm at. And I even had to learn that lesson a little bit when I came to Mexico. I started kind of spending like I was on vacation. And very quickly, I went through a couple grand, and I'm like, "Oh shit, hold on, like, fuck, this ain't happening again." So that's kind of why I came back to the U.S.
Yeah, that is definitely huge.
And Joel, you'll notice like you've been here for a couple months now. Like I think at first there's the novelty factor, but now you're situated here. Most of your days aren't that exciting. You wake up, you have your routine. You wake up, you work, you go to the gym, you eat throughout the day. I mean, you're not eating out all the time anymore. No more Uber Eats. You're cooking your own meals and stuff. So really, so a lot of times, guys, I think they like to glamorize the lifestyle, but most of my days look exactly the same as they do in the U.S. And that was something I went through too. my condo I'm in right now is almost exactly the same as my condo in California. The couch, not that good of quality. I had a nice Italian couch in California. This was a locally made one, and it's terrible. But all the electronics are the same, stereo, literally like almost the same model of everything I had in my California apartment. Sold it all, converted to cash, came here, bought it all again. And but my day-to-day is like my routine's exactly the same as it was in the US. And then, I work in English most of the days, and someone knocks on the door, tuk, 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 and then all of a sudden like, oh, Spanish brain, let's go on. But I think, Joel, I've kind of noticed that with you too. Like, you've kind of calmed down. You're just kind of in the routine now. It's just, you live here.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And, I think the real important thing too is like, yes, I think that's a great thing for everyone to realize, like, no matter where you move, they call it the geographical cure. So a lot of people move to like find that, like, okay, this is going to solve my relationship with my parents or something, like, whatever it might be. Like, I broke up with a girl like 8 years ago. This is going to solve everything, right? It's not, it's a temporary Band-Aid for a permanent, no, it's a permanent, whatever it is, for a solution that needs to be fixed internally. But really, I think the point is, in terms of this podcast and like Passport Bros and stuff and dating, why I think traveling abroad is good for new guys is because it can speed up the process a bit. I think I had a lot more growth coming to these different countries than I would have had in the US. And that's just for me. Of course, there are men out there that do great and can have great growth in the US. For me, I wasn't one of those, and maybe it was the location I was at too. But so almost like I would say use that novelty as a tool, as a way to hit the roads hard, or however you like to date, online or whatever. Like, use that excitement to your advantage, because really the name of the game is experience. And the faster you can get that experience with women, the faster you're going to be able to get to those long-term goals you want. So even coming here, I'm like, you're right, the novelty's worn off, but what I've learned in this 3 months, and especially in those 2 months where I was just kind of that like wide-eyed puppy, like that's going to be what's going to that's like what's transformed my life, basically.
Yeah, it causes you to grow too, because, for example, we mentioned the money thing. When times get tight, there's a time in San Diego where I was without a job. I worked for an architect before that on their proposal team, so I knew all the, like, the major contractors and subcontractors. I walked onto a construction site like, hey guys, like we got you this contract. You know me from the whole procurement or proposal process. Do you have something for me? And they gave me a job on the spot, hauling shit around a construction site. Can't do that now. So it forces you to grow. It forces you to get creative and think outside the box. And again, in learning another language, you learn new ways to communicate new thoughts in a way you haven't done before. So it changes you in a way that you can't unchange. And I think it causes you to mature a lot too. Or you get to that point to where you get washed out. Spend too much money too fast, or think that you're going to be Mr. Don Juan in a country we don't know the language, and you get drugged and robbed and have to go home, or whatever that story may be. But to do it, you're like, okay, I'm in a foreign land. I went to the Middle East this summer, and in my head, when I got off that plane, like, I am literally on the other side of the world. I don't know anyone here. I don't speak any of the languages. Like, yeah, in Europe, okay, oh, you can understand a little French, you can understand a little Italian. Oh, there's some Brits here and there. No, when you go to the Middle East, like, I am the only American guy anywhere around, and there's no one that has my back. In fact, half these people hate what I represent. So it causes you to grow as a person, and you can't undo those changes. So I think, Joel, that's a good point. I haven't thought about that in years, to where it is a good growth process. But again, make sure you do it right, because you want to have a good time. And I think that's where a lot of other content creators go wrong. Like, oh yeah, just get a second passport, move abroad, and then you're going to be like, you're going to be swimming in puss. Like, no, it's not how it happens. Usually those guys they come down, they get really drunk, they live really miserable lifestyles, they have unresolved trauma that Joel mentioned, and they have cheap access to cheap thrills, and then they burn out. They burn out really quick.
Yeah, that's a great point. Because we are coming up close to the hour, I want to make sure that we hit some of the other questions that we had in here.
Yeah, I want to get some of those comments.
Yeah, and so James said here, is South America good for a temporary move, or is it viable for guys to permanently move and eventually retire? And I really like this question, because I don't know about you, if you're planning to live there the rest of your life, I don't know when people make this decision to move to another country, if they're planning to do that and stay there forever. And, on top of this question, do you need to have a remote job to be able to move to another country? Or how do you navigate that? Like, if I were to move down tomorrow to Mexico City, how do I even navigate establishing myself to stay there long term?
It helps. It helps having a remote work because you can work in your bed. And for me, I don't speak Spanish, like barely at all. So I probably couldn't get a job here. It would be very hard. I'd have to look really hard and
Yep.
it would take
You don't have
months.
the legal
So,
status either, and like
right.
you could get a job as like a bar back at a resort or something, but Mexican immigration doesn't look favorably upon that. Again, most countries
Yeah, I
outside of
don't
the
want
U.S.
to.
actually have immigration laws that they enforce. So the idea is you don't want to take a local's job. So I get a lot of shit on. I do TikToks in Spanish down here, and I get a lot of stuff. Oh, you're not paying taxes, you're not doing whatever. It's like I'm bringing a shit ton of money into your economy, and I'm creating jobs. I employ a handful of people, in various degrees. When I go out, I spend money. We're bringing money into the economy. There's a reason the peso is so strong against the dollar right now. It's because of the millions of Americans bringing offloading our dollars in their economy. So in that regard, yeah, the digital nomad thing or just working from your computer, I think that's definitely great. I get people all the time. They'll ask me, "Oh, I'm going to go down there and teach English." Like, okay, you're going to make a Mexican wage and think you're going to live U.S. standards? Like, no. You're going to live like low Mexican class standards and different levels of poverty in different countries. Like the U.S. is getting pretty bad. In fact, the U.S. looks worse in a lot of places than anywhere I've been in Latin America. It's starting to turn into a third world country. But I'd rather be poor in my own country than poor in another country. So obviously, if you're younger, like around our age, you're going to want like some kind of remote income, or you're going to want a nice runway, some sort of passive income if you can live off investments. My work's taken a big dip lately, so I've been living off investments, which I don't like to do. I'm actively looking for another full-time role, but I came down with runway for myself. So you definitely don't want to come down empty-handed. Now, you mentioned for eventually retired. That's a whole different category. So this is a very loaded question. I'll try not to spend too long
I wanted
to
touch on this a little bit, Jaren, too.
Yeah, go for it.
I think, what first came up when I heard this was the name of the game is, for me, is to get experience. So like what we would probably first ask you, James, is like, have you been to South America before? Have you been to other countries? Because when you can really kind of, I think becoming that international man of mystery, if that's the route you take, is probably the move, because I still have a lot of travel to do. Like I'm planning to go to Russia eventually once all that stops, and then Ukraine as well. I want to experience some dating over there. I want to go to more of the Western countries as well. So I want to go back to the US for a while, do like an American tour, get to travel around the US, the places that I didn't get to go to as a kid because I pretty much was stuck in Wisconsin. Go to Canada, travel the world basically. And then by the time I've done all that, I think I'll have a better idea of, okay, where do I really want to stay? Because if I would have just said, okay, Poland's the first place I've ever traveled outside the US, I'm living here forever. I don't think that would have been a wise decision.
It's like marrying the first girl who touches your pee. It's the same
there
thing.
It is.
Same exact
Exactly. So James, if you could let us know, like, hey, have you gone to South Africa before? Have you traveled other places before? And if the answer is no, then I would say probably, go on a little tour, go on an excursion and find yourself, basically. Like, treat this as a time to discover who you really are. I have a buddy from South Africa, and I thought it was
he's saying South America.
Yeah, it's America.
Sure. Yeah.
Oh, fuck. Okay. Wow. Shibuku. So ashamed. Well, South America. Never mind. But yeah.
And that's an important distinction. Huds, I'm glad you brought that up. Because I was thinking the same thing, because I have a point on this too. Based on.
Yeah, go ahead.
If you want. So based on the country. So for me, there's a 10-point checklist why Mexico type industry. So I'm either on East Coast time, US East Coast, or US Pacific Coast time. So for me, going to somewhere like South Africa, what is that, like 12, 13, 14, 16 hour, whatever it is, time difference, that's going to be kind of tough. When Huds and I first started collaborating, I think I was in Greece on our first call. So he'd call me at like midnight, 1 a.m. my time. I'm 3 beers in. I'm like, bro, I swear I'm not an alcoholic. But like when you call me, it's a Saturday night and I'm in fucking Athens. We're out, we're doing stuff. So I took that into consideration for my move. Also, Mexico's close. I was working for one of the big 4 companies when I moved down here, and they needed me in New York at least quarterly. If they needed me on a moment's notice in Miami, guess what? I'm an hour and a half flight away. I'm a 4.5, 5 hour flight away from New York. In fact, I'm closer to major cities in my own country than I was living on the West Coast and going to the East Coast, because Mexico's just kind of right in the middle. So depends on your life situation. You have to map all this stuff out in your head and then ask yourself, is this something that's viable for you? If you have kids, if you have any sort of liabilities, if you're managing properties, if you're managing businesses that require you to be there. Yeah, if you go to Argentina, that's cool. But I know when I used to go to Colombia, It was a 3.5 hour flight from Tijuana to Mexico City. I'd have to sleep in the airport that night because the flight to Medellin took off in the morning, another 3.5 hour flight. And if the flight got delayed, all of a sudden I'm looking at an 18-hour block of time for traveling. That was me. When I lived in Washington State in the small town, I had to commute to Seattle first or drive to Seattle, which was another 3.5 hour drive. So, okay, it takes a day and a half for me to get to where I need to go. If I need to be in San Diego right now, I could walk out of the house and be there in 4.5, 5 hours, So I have that down. So that was a reason I stayed somewhat close to the U.S., but outside of the U.S. But if I were in your situation, I do get people like my parents' age that reach out. Hey, we're retiring soon and we get these nice pensions. Our millennials won't get them, but the baby boomers are still getting pensions, and my mom worked in government for 35, 40 years. So they're getting multi-million-dollar pensions the moment they retire. So same thing, like, hey, I want to go buy a house in Cabo. So I want to go to Latin America. Well, now there's different considerations because you have a fixed amount of money. Let's say it's like, $1.7 million, to pull a number out of my ass here. How much runway does that get you? If you're 65, or if you did an early retirement, or if you're 67 or like 70 doing a later retirement, how long are you going to live until? Does everyone in your family kick over at 82? Okay, well, you have 12 years on $1.7 million. You can do very well. But like in my family, if you don't drink or do drugs or you're not obese, you live until 100 and fucking whatever years old. So if I retire at 65, I've got 35 years left on the clock potentially. $1.7 million isn't going to be enough. And then especially with, geopolitical stuff going on, inflation, they say in Spanish that, if the U.S. gets the flu, Mexico gets a cold. If the U.S. gets a cold, Mexico gets the flu, or however the hell it translates, to where all of these economies are tied together now. And then look into certain countries. So Panama has a really good, at least back in the day when I used to go to Panama City, Panama, the country, a lot. They had good pensioner programs. So you'd go to the movie theater and you'd see like children's rates and then adult rates, and you'd see like pensioner rates. Medical care is a big one too. If you're like terminally ill or have any like pre-existing conditions and you have to plan out, there's a good chance you'll go medically bankrupt in the US. So look at countries to where, can you take advantage of the medical system? Mexico has a hybrid system. They have IMSS. Everyone jokes about it, but guess what? The same private doctors I go to also work at the socialized medical systems. Yeah, wait times are crazy, and maybe the technology isn't as good, but down here, like I have a remote job. I never sign up for health benefits because my copays in the US are ridiculous compared to what it costs down here. It's cheaper for me just paying cash down here and then get everything I need. So really you have to look at where your life currently is, what things in the past might be holding you back. Do you have kids? Do you have kids in college? Do you have aging relatives? Do you have businesses that require you to be there? Where are you right now? How can you feasibly start to make this transition? And then where do you see yourself in the future? So again, it's not a one size fits all answer, but if you're looking at potential retirement, James, I think I have an idea of who you are. So you're closer than I am, but you're still a ways off. You need to start making these decisions now, then mapping out your life years down the line. Like, what is the last day of my life going to look like? Are you going to die in Panama, or do you want to go home and get buried on the family plot? All of these things you have to start to map out, because the further you pull away from your host country, the less and less chance there is of you going back. And if you do go back, it's because you didn't plan correctly, and it's going to be it's going to be a real rude awakening. Let's just say that it's going to be a sobering event. It's not how I'd want this experience to end for anyone.
I like that. I really have to say that the best advice that I've at least gotten myself from this conversation that I'm hearing you say, Jaren, is take it slow and plan everything out.
Yep.
And it sounds simple, but there's so many intricacies that you don't think about until that situation arises. So,
Huds, I'm running into situations like that too on this job search. In 2021, I literally put out a couple resumes on a Monday. Friday, I had 2 full-time offers making multiple 6 figures. And now I've talked to you offline. It's been months now, but the whole remote first thing, a lot of companies are going back to a hybrid model. A lot of companies want you in the office or for remote workers. Never had a problem in my entire career, actually working in Mexico. Even when I lived in California, I'd come to Latin America all the time. Never had a problem, but you're getting people now. We physically need you in the US. Why? Send it to my US bank account. Or you get employers, oh, well, you're living in Mexico, we'll pay you a Mexican wage. Well, luckily I have a US education and I speak English at a US level, and you will get US performance out of me. If you want to do cut rate, hire someone on Fiverr in India and tell me how good that quality of work is. Again, no offense against that stuff, but anyone who's outsourced people before, you pay a premium penny for people that have the English or the Western world brain. So yeah, you're getting employers, and the economy's fucked up back home too. So you're getting pushback to where a couple of years ago, when economic conditions were more favorable for the remote worker, it was like, oh yeah, I'll put out my resume, boom, multiple offers in a couple of days. So in my situation, that's a factor. James, in your situation, that might be a factor for you. Or same thing. Oh, if I have a 401k, okay, well, you're in Canada, it sounds like. Are you going to have a commie government just evaporate your 401k? It's happened before. You're going to be abroad, and then all of a sudden you don't have any money that you can access. They're going to freeze your accounts. Guess what? They froze the truckers' accounts. Be careful what you say on the fucking internet, because you don't want to be in Uruguay and then all of a sudden accounts frozen. What are you going to do? All right,
that's a great point.
That's my tangent. Yeah,
that's a great point. Well, I think these
are things that go through my head being in this situation. Yeah. Like, okay, what's going on globally? What can happen? What's going on from a macroeconomic level? And you have to take these into consideration, because if there's a military coup in the U.S., which we look like a banana republic now, and all of a sudden they close my bank account because I said a mean thing on the internet, like, I'm fucked. But I'm not, because I think about these things. I've got a stockpile of cash in strategic locations around the city and with certain people and whatever, to where I can get out. Or I've had this conversation with my family. Let's say the U.S. erupts in a civil war, and then Mexico gets a radical president. They say, gringos, get the fuck out of here. We don't want you here. Where am I going next? I have other countries on the docket. I've made those connections to where, like, and my family and I, we talk about these things because, I'm not going to dive into family history, but they've generationally, they've gone through these experiences before. So
yeah, it's a good point.
You're planning, do your thinking.
Do the planning. All right. Well, I think that's a good place to stop. This was a great discussion. Thank you both for hopping on. We could talk all day, and I think we should definitely dive deeper into some of the stuff, the details that people don't think about. Like, even right now, I'm super interested to like learn how you do retire in other countries, and like now I want to look up all these different types of laws.
Do your research here too. Nomad Capitalist is great. He goes way more in depth than I do. I'm pretty well versed on Mexico, but he has 5-6 passports, and he does like country by country profiles and things like that. I'm just really scratching the surface as it pertains, because I do more like the dating, lifestyle, fitness, and then Mexico type topics. Eventually I want to get to that point, but Nomad Capitalist, he's a fantastic resource.
Awesome. Well, guys, until next time, enjoy the rest of your day. Peace out.
Yep. Deuces.